Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome. Welcome back to any of you who joined our events last week, and a very welcome hello to any of you who are new today. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name's Anne Burt, and I'm going to be your host for the next 45 minutes. This webinar is part of Smarter Working Live 2023. During February, we're hosting 10 days of these bite-sized workshops, followed by our virtual conference day on the 1st of March. You can head over to smarterworkinglive.com to find out more and to sign up. All our events are free and they're open to anyone in the public sector with an interest in smarter working. So if you want to help us spread the word, that would be fantastic. Have you got colleagues that you think would be interested in what we've got to share? Do pass on that website link to them as well. So on to this morning's event. The purpose of this session and all of our sessions as part of Smarter Working Live is to inform and to inspire. Here at the Government Property Agency, we are really proud to be the natural home of smarter working across government. We are all about creating great places for our people to work so that they can deliver great outcomes. And in the course of our work, we are incredibly lucky to partner with all sorts of organisations, to have access to people who are at the cutting edge of research, finding out what's happening out there, bringing that back to us. And Smarter Working Live really is all about bringing all of this great knowledge and experience to you, sharing what we've learned, building up wider public sector knowledge and experience so that smarter working really is made into something that really is going to help us through the next few years of our work. So on to today's topic. It is one that is absolutely at the heart of smarter working. It's about the role of leadership. Now, moving to outcomes-based leadership is probably the biggest cultural challenge many people will have experienced in their careers. Supporting your people to try out new ways of working, exploring what makes them effective individually, but also as a team, those require leadership skills that are focused around trust, around collaboration, and around innovation. And we have some amazing panellists with us today to explore this topic. So first, I'm going to invite to the stage Dr. Nicola Millard. Now, she's been a pioneer in the smarter working world for many years, probably more than you care to remember, Nicola, I imagine. And your work as a principal innovation partner at BT has really been focused on researching those innovative ways of working and kind of all the different ingredients that go into that. I'm going to start our conversation in a second, but first I just want to do the sort of part where this is the exciting live bit, where we get to talk to people joining us on this webinar. So I'm going to be starting off the conversation with Nicola, and I've got a few questions that I'd like to ask her, but I want to invite all of you watching to get involved as well. So what are the challenges you're facing in this area that we can help you with today? You can type your question into the chat and we will do our best to get them answered this morning. I can't promise we'll be able to answer everything, but I'll give you a way at the end that you can follow up with us if there's something you particularly like to discuss. But we would really love to know what your questions are as well. I don't want to be selfish and hog the whole conversation with Nicola. So let's get underway. So Nicola, as I said, you've been flying the flag for smarter working for many, many years, haven't you? And it's now a key topic for every leader of every organisation. So kind of take us on a flight, if you can, through what are the highlights, do you think, across lots of different organisations? What are the things that you think really stand out for you at the moment in terms of this area?
Well, I mean, I've been sort of researching the future of work for, well, in the form that it is at the moment, about 14 years. So way before the pandemic started. And it's quite weird that the pandemic, as with everything, just kind of drove a bullet train through quite a lot of the trends that we were talking about before the pandemic started. So, and they just got hyper accelerated. So I think we're in a fantastic and interesting transition phase at the moment. So the pandemic's still here. We can't say it's finished yet. It's probably going to be with us for a while. But the ways that we're working have completely transformed. And I think we've got this kind of tension at the moment between sort of the old ways and the new ways and what we learnt during the pandemic. So my work, I'm part of BT's innovation team. So my work as a researcher is to kind of say, well, what did we learn during the pandemic? What went well? What didn't go so well? How do we orient ourselves to the future? and kind of look at the various scenarios that might play out, I guess, into what is probably a hybrid world, and all of those tensions that are maybe pulling us in different ways. So I think personally, we have this opportunity at the moment to reinvent work for three reasons. We need to reinvent it for people, because we need to make sure that the people can work in the work. We need work to work for people. We need to get it to work for productivity. That's been fairly stagnant for at least 10 years now. So we need to help productivity get productive. And to be honest, we might be measuring the wrong things as well, which is a very big debate in the productivity world. And then, of course, the planet. We need to make it friendly for the planet as well. So we need to make sure that whatever we reinvent is a green option, is reducing our carbon footprint. So I think, those three things, well, each one is a challenge on its own, but we have this opportunity to take a lot of the learning that we saw during the pandemic and kind of go, well, how do we get work to work for us now? And I think hybrid, it's a model that's been talked about for a long time, to be honest. It was always kind of regarded as a very complex model. I think we're all finding that now. One size does not fit all in hybrid. But we have learned a lot, I think, during the pandemic around particularly fully remote work. I think the challenge now is to bring that fully remote universe into a universe where we've got physical and remote. And to be honest, the default there, the common ground, if you like, isn't the home, it isn't the office, it's digital. So how do we get that digital common ground to work for everybody, regardless of where they happen to be?
And I think, again, we had a whole session last week talking about sustainability, and I think that's a really big topic and part of this as well. And the digital we've got coming up too. So I think we could probably talk at great length about both those topics. But I think the bit I'm particularly interested in to talk about today is probably that people part. And again, probably reflecting on the situation we're in at the moment and about the kind of the changes in the economy. Do you think that's having an influence at all on kind of how leaders are viewing this and kind of how do you think that's having an impact at all on kind of what organisations are thinking about and what their appetites are for this?
It certainly does seem to be. I mean, some people have said, oh, well, up until now, kind of because we've got skill shortages and actually a healthy employment market, the shoe has kind of been on the employee's foot, if you like. So employees have had choices. There was the movement where everyone was looking for jobs and changing jobs on a very regular basis. Whether that was, a massive movement over here, I'm not sure. But we're still in a situation where the job market is pretty healthy, but we know that we're heading into recession. So we've got those two tensions for a start. Now, it is true, if we look at some of the LinkedIn data, for example, they're saying that the number of jobs being advertised at the moment with some degree of flexibility or hybridity in them have reduced. However, those jobs are oversubscribed. The ones that are actually advertising hybridity, flexibility are getting the applicants. So I think when we want good talent, that we want good skills, that top talent is looking for flexibility as that number one option. So I think when we ask, again, doing research into what employees want, yeah, they want a good salary. And I always say that's the start point. But actually, if you've got enough to live on, other things start to become more important. So I think flexibility and choice, autonomy, trust, and predictability, all of those things come up as things that employees are looking for. So I think in order to sort of recruit and retain, which is, to be honest, a lot of the hybrid policies from a people perspective, they're there to both recruit and retain good employees. I think we are still going to be maintaining that model. But there are tensions, certainly, if we're talking about leadership and management. We know from research that's out there that maybe leaders and bosses have a slightly different opinion of hybrid than employees do. And therein lies one of the big tensions. And it's quite interesting, to be honest, from a leadership perspective, all of the sort of classic leadership things that we look at, like leading by walking around. Very difficult to do in a hybrid situation, because if you're walking around a physical office, you're only seeing the people in that physical office. And the danger then is you're maybe in the same days every week and everyone else is in the same days every week. So you only see the same people. And then, of course, I'm a psychologist by background. So lots of things kick in, unconscious biases like proximity bias. So, we grew up our brain is incredible, but our brain is tribal. So, you know, in caves, our Neanderthal cells would kind of trust the people that we saw around us. So those kind of proximity biases can cause, obviously, things like, you know, people get promoted because they're seen to be in an office. They get a good appraisal because they're seen to be in an office. But is that actually productivity, or is that just presenteeism that we're seeing? So I think from a leadership perspective, leadership is a lot more difficult in the hybrid model. And I can't say I blame leaders and bosses for saying, hey, I want an easier life. I don't want to spend my whole day back to back on meetings, waking up with an impending sense of Zoom, although other platforms are available. But you know, that's a difficult job to do. Now, from an employee perspective, we see a slightly different picture. And it's interesting when we look at some of the research being done out, for example, at Stanford University around these different attitudes towards work, and the fact that employees feel that they're more productive when they're working remotely, when they're working from home. The difference seems to be the perception of the commute. And the commute's been that big one that no one's missed. But certainly employees tend to factor in the commute into their working day. And that could be an exhausting commute into maybe 2 hours into an urban location on trains that are overcrowded. Or it could be quite a short one, of course. So depending on your commute and your personal circumstance, that's going to affect you. Bosses, though, don't factor in the commute. They just factor in the number of days that you are working. So I think that's the first fascinating thing. And then there was some recent research actually published last week around what people did in the, on average, I think it's about an hour and 10 minutes that we save in the UK at the moment on commutes. What do we reinvest that time into when we do save commute time? The answer is largely work. Not exclusively. Obviously, we do other stuff as well, but a lot of the tasks that we do are either work or training, obviously caring, looking after family as well. So that time is actually reinvested wisely, that liminal time, if you like, saved by the commute. So I think there's some interesting perceptions. And of course, Microsoft research termed this the productivity paradox, the fact that maybe bosses have a slightly different opinion than employees about hybridity and hybrid working. But we need to resolve that in order to make the hybrid model work.
And it's something I'm sure we will spend the rest of this conversation talking about, that shift, you know, that really huge fundamental shift that for a lot of leaders, they will have spent their careers working in one kind of way and got to where they are using those certain behaviors and traits, and the system has operated around them in that way, and actually kind of helping people reflect on just how big a shift this is and kind of how much, you know, it is likely to need new skills and behaviors, and to normalize that and to say this is very new for everyone. And I'm interested in thinking about that tension that leaders often have as well. They want to know what everyone else is doing. They want to seek that reassurance that what they're doing is not out of step with everyone else. So probably this is the first sort of grand, you know, worldwide experiment that's very visible for everybody. Previously, organizations could kind of quietly think about this stuff themselves and kind of come up with a policy and do it very inwardly focused. You know, we've had lots of conversations on social media about kind of tech companies and the roles that they're playing in kind of setting their example of what they expect from their employees, and everybody else making lots of comments about that and thinking, well, what does that mean? Kind of those people in leadership roles are really steering a lot of this activity, aren't they? So how do you think we can help leaders look a bit more inwards into their organizations and understand that smarter working leadership actually is moving away from that one size fits all, like, oh, if that company X is doing something, we better copy them, which has been quite prevalent, I've noticed, over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I think we're a bit down on leaders, aren't we? I think actually leaders did remarkably well during the pandemic, which shows how adaptable we are. But I think managing a fully remote team, which we all had a crash course in, and even the ones that were very uncertain. Actually, we did some research where we did interviews a year apart, particularly contact center managers, actually. But it was quite interesting that they were saying at the very beginning, we want everyone back because we don't know how to manage a team that's remote. And then, you know, a year on, they managed a remote team for a year, and it had actually worked very well. And then their anxiety had shifted to, okay, I know how to run a fully remote team now. What I'm really anxious about is managing a team that's split between physical and digital. And I'm not sure I know how to do that. So I think, you know, firstly, we do need to give our leaders and managers training. I think we'd also identified before the pandemic in the research that one of the vital skills that leaders need is the ability to network. So that human ability, I call this ability the perfect party host gene. So, we know people that are perfect party hosts. And the thing is, they know how to throw a party. So there's a purpose for the party. That's the big thing. How do we establish a purpose? Then you invite the right people that are going to, make a good party, or indeed serve the purpose. So you know a little bit about all the people. And then generally the brilliant party hosts are the ones that bring those people together and introduce them and create that conversation. I think all leaders need to have that skill. Now, there's good or bad and bad news on this. So I guess starting with the bad news, most of us are terrible networkers. I am a terrible networker. I think London Business School said it was something like 3 and 4 of us are terrible networkers. There's one little gem in there that there's a natural networker. So that's the bad news. The good news is it is a skill. And as a skill, we can start to train it. And we need to train it not just in physical space. We need to train it in digital space. They're similar skills, but obviously slightly different disciplines. I always say the digital space it's a lot more formalized than the physical space. There's a lot of talk in physical space about serendipity. Yes, serendipity does happen. I personally think that possibly the role of serendipity might be a tiny bit overblown at times, but I'm not sure how many profound conversations I do have at water coolers or coffee points. I do certainly have some, but they're not my entire day. But how do I then establish those connections digitally? And the beauty of the connections digitally is I'm not bound by a building. I'm not bound by proximity. I am bound by the limits of the internet, to be perfectly honest. So I can connect with anyone, anywhere. And I keep saying you can form relationships, and very profound relationships online. Hence, dating applications kind of do work. People do get married after meeting on Twitter, that kind of stuff. So we can establish quite strong relationships. But again, we've got to work hard to do it. I think the other thing we learned during the pandemic was that typically because communication within teams got a lot stronger, because we were really disciplining ourselves to talk to people within our team and keep people updated and communicate, that the ties within teams got a lot stronger. But that was at the expense of the weaker ties, the other teams that would be adjacent to us, the people that we would bump into in a building. And that's the bit, to be honest, that the physical spaces really do facilitate. So that serendipity, that ability to talk to people who aren't necessarily in your direct line of sight, your direct team, is incredibly valuable. And then that's got a knock-on effect as to how we design our spaces as well. And I think we are certainly seeing, and we'd seen before the pandemic, office spaces that were more constructed for collaboration, communication and community, rather than necessarily how many people can I get into a very small room, how many desks can I get in? And the conversation, I think, now has rapidly shifted into, okay, how do we get people back into an office? How do we make offices attractive places for people to work, to make connection, to create community, rather than doing it exclusively online? So there's all sorts of tensions. That's why I said this is a very interesting period of time, because we don't have all the answers. We're starting to learn what works and what doesn't work. And something that works for one team might not work for another. So I think this is definitely not a one-size-fits-all situation. But as soon as we get a non-one-size-fits-all situation, we get complexity. And I think that's the one thing that we're all finding at the moment. We can't just put a rule saying, hey, you've got to be in the office three days a week. The 3-2 model is starting to become quite normal now. So because it might not suit everybody. And if you schlep into an office, 2 hours commute into an office and spend your entire day on video calls, that's probably not necessarily what you should be doing in an office. So that's where that sort of choice and autonomy piece comes in. And I think we need to give teams and people choices and autonomy. We kind of need to know what people are doing, who's doing it, where they're doing it, and how potentially that is done best, given those team dynamics. And that's quite complicated to know.
And as you say, it's still in the really early stages of trying to get some proper data on that. And one thing we know is leaders love, instant data at their fingertips, and they want answers right away. So kind of having that ability to learn as we're going is probably kind of, again, a new skill that we've got to teach people. I've been conscious of my role as a party, feeling like not a great party host at the moment, because I'm conscious you and I've been talking, that's because we've been waiting for our second panelist to come and join us. It was like the virtual equivalent of he was still mingling in the lobby, and we were just trying to get him to come to our little party in here. So it's time to introduce our third part of our conversation this morning. Ravi Chand is the director of the Civil Services Places for Growth programme, and this is at the heart of the levelling up agenda, giving opportunities for high quality careers. Back to what Nicola was talking about, people could be working anywhere across the UK, right to the very top levels of leadership, and connecting the civil service back out to our local community, so we're not all being based in one particular place anymore. So welcome, Ravi. Welcome to our little party this morning that we're having here. And I think Nicola's brought up probably some big, deep questions that we can jump into in a moment. But I was kind of interested to bring you in here because I think talking about that culture change and that mindset change, Places for Growth is a fantastic example to me, because for the last couple of 100 years or so, Whitehall has been the beating heart of government, hasn't it? And the civil service has really been shaped around that. And actually, even though the majority of civil service roles are outside of London already, I think the perception has been that to get on in your career, to be in that position of leadership, you kind of need to be in, SW1 area, probably. But Places for Growth is really trying to change that perception and has a really ambitious agenda around that. So I was interested in your thoughts of kind of how are you demonstrating that a dispersed leadership model might actually strengthen the civil service, and kind of what lessons have you been learning on that front that you could bring in for us?
Brilliant, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
We can indeed.
Yes, sorry I'm late. I was delayed because I had a urgent ministerial meeting, oddly enough, discussing this very issue with the Minister of the Cabinet Office. So I'll talk a bit about that and some of the challenges we have on the leadership. We talk specifically about getting senior roles and roles out of London, what it means. I know it's right on the top of the Prime Minister's priorities list. He's made it very clear. We've briefed him on this. He's keen that we get a UK government for the whole of the UK. So that means a civil service based across different parts of regions and the nations in the UK in a way that we make policy in place because we are better connected to place, because we live and work in the area. That's really, really important. So we are less London-centric. One of the challenges the civil service has found historically, even certainly in response to certain crises or issues, is, the majority of our senior civil servants, all particularly our policy civil servants, in the policy profession, about 86% are in central London, southwest one. And so when you think, what's their insight into life experience? Well, insight into life experience is just living in and around London. And the challenge is, how do you give a view on what it's like to be in Newcastle or Manchester or Salisbury or Preston or Stoke-on-Trent, and these and how to grow our workforces in those places in a way that really works and represents the interests of people there, but also allows that to those informed views to form part of the way we make policy, generally as government or civil service. So for me, and Nicola, by the way, I caught the 10 minutes of what you said, and I was nodding vigorously to all the stuff. I was saying I completely agree with all the stuff you said. Completely make exactly, they're the kind of challenges, and it just shows how some of the challenges we have. And I think we've got to do a lot more around. There's a number of things we need to do. First of all, as I said, the getting senior roles into place. So 70 to 80% of our fast streamers, graduates, are coming from all around the UK, traveling to London, getting an expensive flat, access the fast stream program, and sometimes then settling there, getting married, having children, whatever they do, and then living there in really expensive accommodation. And our question is, well, we're sucking talent from outside London into London. What can we do to grow that talent and capability in place? So we've been doing a lot of work with universities. We've developed some campaigns with government recruitment service to promote place better, to attract talent. In fact, the latest videos we're about to launch soon with GRS will have local voices, local accents. So it's clear that what we're trying to recruit, you're not going to talk like me, they'll talk like wherever they come from, in different parts of the UK, which is really, really important in terms of our attraction strategy. Getting that mix of people with a mix of skills, apprenticeship programs, graduate programs, developing our pipelines, because all our pipelines were in London originally, because that's where we thought we needed them. We're developing them in different parts of the country. And as you said, 80% of our civil service is outside London. But generally, it's all junior grades. And a review carried out by Civil Service HR a few years ago called Careers Without Barriers identified that our staff outside London felt if they wanted to get on with their career, they had to move to London. What we are trying to do through this program, and previous programs have failed to do this, they've moved roles up with more junior or operational type roles, but never the policy making capabilities and more senior SCS roles to the numbers we need. So we've really committed to get this right. Is to, in places, co-locate departments in buildings, in government hubs, working with GPA, really great success in that, with the GPA Government Hubs program. Co-locate departments, create more senior roles, and give people the opportunity to have a career in those places. Now, when I visit these places, and I have visited pretty much every place in the UK, I think now, where we're doing work, the stories I hear, we use some of these in Civil Service Live last year. We had some people come and talk at Civil Service Live for us, talking about their experience and saying, actually, I'll take an example. There's someone who worked for the Department of Education in Darlington. And actually, to be honest, they were the only department in Darlington once upon a time, really. A few others, bits of other departments. Now it's an economic campus. And this individual, I can't remember, SCO, went to get to grade 7, said they never thought they were going to get a grade 7 job because it's like dead man's shoes, what they call, waiting for someone to disappear before they can take up, that vacancy as it occurs. And there were no other departments there. And that person then landed up working for Treasury, I think, and they got a grade 7 job. And they said, I now have multiple departments in the same place with lots more opportunities to have a fulfilling career. I don't need to go to London. And that's what we want to achieve in terms of our place of growth ambitions, is to really create those possibilities. On the issues that the relief comes up again, I have had our colleagues in London say, well, look, I work from home, hybrid, and in fact, I'm a home worker. Why can't I live in London and be responsible for Newcastle or something, you can get a sense that defeats the object, So we're really interested in these roles being in place within the travel to work area of those places to have a direct impact to local economies as well. So as part of our levelling up commitments to government, it's also about how do we level up in a way that supports economies. And my discussion with the Minister of the Cabinet Office just now was very much about, because I was trying to explain to why it's better to have concentration of hubs and have critical mass, because you get agglomeration opportunities and you have impact on the economy. And we're going to measure that by autumn. I'm expected to have some analysis of economic impact of roles relocating. And we have had huge success in relocating roles. I don't know how public this is and who else is listening to this call, but I mean, the latest figures are brilliant. We're way ahead of relocation numbers. Of the 22,000 by 2030, I can share, we're up to 11,000. So kind of half of it already, and we're in 2022, 23, So, well, that was by the end of 2022, by the way, by December. Those figures were up to December. So I think it's happening, and departments are showing real commitment to this agenda. I've got second permanent secretary for HMRC based in Leeds. I've got a second permanent secretary based in Darlington. I've got one in Bath. I've got DGs, directors general in places, directors. It's growing. So the other thing I want to do though is develop that cadre of senior folk in these places, create their networks so they play a role in recruiting, developing the capabilities of those places. But also recognize that nowadays, not everybody wants to come in the office every day, 2-3 days, and that's okay. And we are building our buildings with GPA and planning on the basis that 50% occupation of your numbers, and allows us to use those buildings more efficiently. And GPA doing some fantastic work in this space. What it means is that we will also, going back to Nicola's point, I think we need to develop. I was brought up classroom-based, how to manage teams, how to lead, stand on the stage, I meet my team that are on my floor plate, I could stand up and talk to them together and tell them what I want, That world has shifted to mixed teams. My teams are based all over the UK, actually, and they all come on a call and I talk to them. It's a different skill set. It's a different way of engaging. So there's something about not just recruiting and developing our capabilities, but we have an opportunity now to recruit and develop capabilities in our future SCS and our senior cadre of people who are the new generation of different ways of working, and and hybrid working. Who understand how to really motivate staff and engage staff and keep them feel like they're valued and they contribute. So you don't get what Nicola was saying. If you're in the room, you're visible. I see you, therefore you're doing something. And if I can't see you, you're not doing anything. So learning those things are new skills, and they need to be part of our development offer going forward as we grow our capability. And I think I'm pretty confident that we'll get this right a lot quicker outside London than in London, because of course we're recruiting afresh, and so there's an opportunity for us to get that right. Sorry, that might be a long answer to your question. Sorry.
Not at all, Ravi. I think you again, there's so many ways I feel this conversation should go, and I don't want to be selfish and hold all of the questions, so I'm going to give one final call out to the audience. So if you've got any questions you'd like to put to the panel, we've got a little bit of time now to do that. I'm going to ask one more for me before I open up to the audience questions, which is just for both of you to have a think about, kind of just for you personally, kind of what's an inspiring example you've seen recently of a leader really kind of embracing, you know, all of the complexities that comes with this new way of working. Is there anything that you thought, oh, I could learn something from that? So Nicola, could I come to you first on that?
I'm going to be a bit cheesy and say the boss that I had during the pandemic was fabulous. And I think he really did lead by example. So he made sure, primarily actually, and I think that this is another thing that leaders had a very kind of crash course in, was to become very empathetic. So rather than starting a meeting going, here's the agenda and this is what we're going to cover, making sure everyone was okay. I think, you know, that's, we're in a weird time and there are lots of crises all over us at the moment. So, you know, making sure your team are okay and have everything that they need, and not be entirely business focused on meetings necessarily. I mean, actually, we had two separate meetings, one to just, you know, find out if we were all okay, and another one which was a little bit more business focused. But we probably wouldn't have done that without the pandemic. But again, you know, the boss I had, his name's Phil. He's fabulous, but yeah, he really did take that on board and recognize that this was an extreme time, and we're still in extreme times. And I don't think we should forget that sort of leading by empathy piece. I think it's interesting, the research that we did talking to a lot of managers said that they started to get to know people maybe on a slightly different basis as well, because obviously when we're all fully remote, those of us that were lucky enough to be remote, we could start to see into people's front rooms, and, you know, we could see how they decorated and what their bookshelves looked like, and, you know, what chandeliers they had, if they did. One of our team does, but you started to know them as a person slightly more, and indeed I met pretty much everyone's kids, spouses, dogs, cats as well. So instantly it was a slightly different dimension than had we all been in an office together. We probably never would have done that. Now, I think now when we're in a hybrid situation, I think we almost have forgotten about that. So although, again, those strong team bonds are there, when we met people's dogs, cats, children, spouses, you know, we can have a conversation about that. But for new people that are coming in, or people beyond that team, we're only seeing their office persona. And again, I think that's maybe a pity that we're not necessarily seeing the whole person. And we are certainly starting to see a leadership style that is more around the being authentic at work, being empathetic, trusting by default, I think, is another one. So, you know, rather than putting lots of surveillance tools in and going, well, I can't see them working if they're remote, let's make sure that we've got surveillance tools to see if they're sitting at their keyboard. That brings in that huge question is, what is productivity? Is it sitting at a keyboard? Probably not. And of course I found out there are lots of cheats you can do, by the way. So there was one guy that apparently put his mouse on a fan so that the fan just basically continuously moved. So it looked as if he was always at the keyboard because his mouse was going all the time. Yeah, I mean, that's natural human nature, rational cheating it is called. But if you put stupid things in like that, you're going to get people cheating the system. Why not just say, I'm going to treat you like an adult, and I'm going to trust you. And obviously managing by output is very valuable in that way, because it's not about how many hours are you working. It's, do you actually produce the thing that you're supposed to be producing on time and to quality? So I think that all of that we're starting to see shift. But yeah, I would say my boss during the pandemic, sadly not my boss now, was a very good example of a leader that I certainly did. Well, he helped me through the pandemic, to be honest, hugely. So you can't ask more than that from your boss.
Oh, thanks, Nicola. A really inspiring example for me of that. Like you said, that really bringing that empathy into the situation and having that space for the human in there, so that hopefully, you know, people feel that they've got that openness and that trust. Ravi, over to you. Is there anything that you've seen recently that's made you think, oh, that this is a really something I could learn from?
Yeah, so look, so Beth Russell, she's a second HMT, and she's based in Darlington. She used to live in London. She moved to Darlington, you know, as a DJ, then became second perm sec. And I'm really inspired by her, and I know maybe slightly biased, she's also the sponsor of my program, but she took personal leadership by promoting really all the activities locally, about recruiting locally, inspiring people to join the civil service, really making a civil service brand in place, and also negotiating with the Chancellor that she doesn't have to be in London all the time to face for meetings. She can do all her meetings, be it business as usual online. And that was certainly with Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor, and now even with the new Chancellor, she's done exactly the same, and she has a really good relationship. And by just having that, showing senior leadership saying, no, we can do this online and don't have to be in a meeting room, and have, because the challenge I always had with senior folk traveling up and down on trains, just to be in meetings that could have been done in this way. And so really inspiring. I think the way she's done that and led has been a really good example. And we do get her to speak at various places to tell her what she did, because that's exactly what we want to see, more of that leadership. And and also it's bravery as well, because you have to have that difficult conversation with ministers.
Thank you, Ravi. We've got a few minutes left for questions from the audience, and I can see some things popping in. We've had a really interesting one from Leah around kind of the habits that we've got into during COVID, and about, obviously we've touched on it a lot. It was a very huge life-changing event for everybody, and kind of our reactions to that are probably still, we're still probably working those through, but how working at home became our kind of little cozy space that we could control and trust, and how the office has suddenly become a much more, unknown thing for people. Back to what you were saying, Nicola, about when else are people in, what are you actually doing in the office? So I was interested to know from your perspective, first of all, kind of how do you think that is playing out? Is that a factor, do you still think, in kind of how people feel about, being out with other people in the workplace, and kind of how could leaders be encouraging people to think about that?
I think the first thing to say is home working didn't work for everybody. So I think we all had very different experiences. It's kind of, we were all in the same boat, but we were on different oceans, I guess, is always how I put it. But so I think, firstly, only 50% of the UK population were able to homework. So the other 50% are in frontline roles, and those are very difficult to do from home. Although obviously some aspects of automation might change that. We are talking about maybe remote surgery, hairdressing, air traffic controllers. If you've seen some of the EE adverts, they were not faked, those adverts. They were actually done. They were rehearsed quite a lot. But there are some jobs that potentially could be done remotely that are now done face to face. So there's that comment. I think of the 50% that were able to do it, the evidence was about 70% did adjust and created an environment that worked for them. 30% did not. That 30% did tend to skew slightly younger, and there were reasons for that. Then, firstly, often they're in shared housing, so they're competing for space, they're competing for bandwidth. And the second thing is about the network piece again that I was talking about. So they haven't got as well developed networks at work, and those networks are far easier to build face to face. So that aspect, I think, certainly if you ask them, do they value the office? That's why they value the office. It's to build those networks, build those friendships. Having said that, when you ask them about the value of not being in an office, they also value that as well. So they want to be in an office, but they also want to be not in an office when they choose. So I think that choice piece is absolutely vital. On the office bit, I think we're all struggling at the moment around, well, okay, for those that bedded down and really did value the home working proposition, how do we get them back into the office? How do we make them comfortable? How do we give them a reason to be there? And that's where a lot of data came in. And you mentioned data earlier, Anne, but can we start to use data within office spaces? Data about who's in there, what are they doing? Not in a kind of Big Brother is watching you, I'm going to judge you way, but in a way that says, are these offices actually working for the people that are in it? And how do we help? Maybe I love the description of an office as theatrically fluid. I'm massive theatre nut for a start. So theatres change depending on the production that's going on in them. Offices should as well, because things change within offices, work changes within offices, people change within offices. So how do we get a fluidity in that office space that actually helps the people that are in it to do their work productively? And when they are in office, when they've made that effort, it's absolutely worth coming in.
Thank you, Nicola. And I'm going to try and pick up one last question from the chat, just very quickly. That's come into the main chat from Steph Budd around kind of back to that inspiring example leaders can give around kind of giving confidence to their staff when they're working remotely, and that trust. So kind of, I know we've touched on it as well, Nicola. I think, Ravi, for you, kind of that sense of How are ministers trusting that work is getting done all over the country, across the UK, when they can't see them? Is there anything from that you could take that could help?
Yeah, look, and I had this debate by the way with countless ministers now, and certainly all of them. We have these debates about, well, how do we know people are being productive? The issue is we assess them on the product they produce. So if I have somebody go away and produce me a slide deck, I know what they're working on. I get a slide deck, whatever they're doing, so do some analysis or write me a paper. That's what that's what we judge. And really, it's really important when it comes to ministers. And I made this, I've said this quite a few times to my senior colleagues, it's our responsibility at our level to manage those relationships with ministers. And, it's not for ministers to work out what my team are doing and whether they're working or not. That's my job, right? And I ask my team, and they know, to do whatever it is, write a paper or a briefing from a minister or a visit, whatever they're doing. And they give me a timeline when it's going to be done, and whatever analysis, and I get it back, job done, I read it, it's gone. I don't need it to have a minister involved now. What I for me with ministers is reassure the minister that people are working, they are productive, and they're having real impact. That's really important. And and we will always get people who come with a very skewed view because they were brought up being in an office. And by the way, ministers still have to go to the House of Commons all the time and be in if you like, an office type environment. So for them, it's always face to face. And the interesting one of the debates, I don't know how much I shared with my discussion with the minister, but one of the debates that was interesting is, to what degree is it senior civil servants want to be there in the room with the minister? To what degree does the minister want the civil servant to be in the room, to see that they're working or being productive? And I think it's a bit of 50-50 here. So I think it's something to be learned for ourselves is, as a senior cadre, we need to change the way we behave and operate, and the role we play to protect our staff and allow our staff to work in a way that they can be really productive then. And I saw something in here about people taking breaks, and I don't care how many breaks people have in the day. A coffee every 10 minutes if you want. The issue is, what is it we're asking you to do? Are you delivering it? And and you're making the best use of your time you're available? I think people do a lot more. Well, I know they do more work from home than they do sometimes in the office. Less distractions, and all the other things. So it's not just ministers, but it's our responsibility as senior folk.
Thank you, Ravi. We've got some lovely comments in the chat about things that people have been sharing as well. And for anyone who's interested, the GPA Smarter Working Programme has produced a whole range of tools to help people have these kind of conversations in teams. If you don't know where to start, if you're thinking, how do I broach some of these topics? We'll put our contact details in the chat in a moment so that anyone who's interested can pick that up, because I'm afraid the time has flown by and we've run out of time for any more questions. So apologies if we didn't get to something that you wanted to know, but I will put something in the chat for you to make contact with us. Thank you, a huge thank you to Nicola and Ravi. This has been a wonderful party. I feel like we should rebrand this now, the cocktail hour or something, but obviously with virtual cups of tea or something. But this is such a huge topic for us to pick up, and so many different angles to it. But I've really appreciated, the insight that you've brought, the really, really relevant experiences, and the really deep reflections that we can all take from it, I think, this morning. And I do hope for all of you watching, it has informed and inspired you. I've seen a few things in the chat already. I hope it's given you some new ideas to take back to your organisations. If you're thinking, how can I broach that difficult conversation with someone who's yet to be convinced? I hope it's given you some things to think about. If you're thinking about in your own teams, how can you empower your teams to think about that outcome a lot more that Ravi was talking about just then? I hope it's done that too. And we'd really like to make sure that these events are useful to you. So we have a really, really, really quick feedback form. It'll take you less time to fill in than me telling you about it, I promise. That's pinned in the chat, just to give us a sense of, are these events working for you? This is a new approach for us, doing this kind of format, these bite-sized webinars. We really want to make sure that, in 45 minutes, we squeeze as much as we can into it for you. Don't forget that Smarter Working Live 2023 continues. We have the rest of this month with more of these bite-sized webinars on topics from great workplace to design, to how the tech enables the workplace, to what on earth is going to happen next in the world of smarter working. Some big questions for us to answer. And our Smarter Working Live Day on the 1st of March is our big virtual festival, if you like, of everything to do with smarter working. Come, be inspired, network with your peers. We're really going to make that live this year. So lots of the topics will be decided by you and shaped by you. So again, in the chat, there's a link to a poll that you can use to tell us what you want to hear about. We want to make the content really relevant for you. What are the challenges that you're facing at the moment? What can we help you? What questions can we pose to our experts that will help you in your challenges? You can choose what the topics are on that at the moment. The vote for that's going to close in about 10 days time, so you've got a little while to think and reflect. But thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. A huge thanks again to Nicola and Ravi for their wit and wisdom this morning. Lots of that in evidence, definitely. And I hope to see you at some more of our events during the month. But that's it for this Smarter Working Live 2023 webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope you all feel inspired and go away a little bit enlightened after this 45 minutes. Thank you so much.